Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's had a good evening last night. Those who attended, I think it was pretty fun and eventful and entertaining. But to get us kicked off this morning before we start our study, I've asked Bob to lead us in prayer.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we can come together and study your word, Father, without interference and without others coming in and persecuting us. But Father, help us to always be faithful to you and always stand up for Jesus Christ. We thank you so much for Jeremy and his ability to teach, and we pray that we might gain much knowledge from these classes. And we just thank you, Father, that you've blessed us so much. We pray that you would continue to guide us and direct us as we enter your study. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Before we get going this morning, there was something that was brought up last week by Stacy Kinsey about the idea of cloning. We didn't look at it much, but I do think that as a congregation, we need to be aware of what is going on with this whole concept of cloning and have a good idea of understanding what it is. Now, cloning in general, the first lamb was cloned successfully from embryo to birth in 96, and his name was Dolly, and it was a female. Now, since then, they've been trying to clone everything. Before then, they was cloning different reptiles and mammals. None of them would come out living. They had stem cells, and so the drive was to study the stem cells in these clones. So from there, it's progressed. Mammals have been cloned on a regular basis. Animals are cloned. It's not a highly successful process. In fact, for every attempt it was to create a lamb, I think 1 in 207 attempts was somewhat successful. Not successful to birth, but successful to the stem cell approach. Since then, the discussion started up on the debate on life. Is this something that is ethical? Many countries banned human cloning right off the bat, but it's more of a verbal ban. There's not a whole lot of laws. The study kept progressing and still moving, and primates were recently successfully cloned. And when we talk about cloning, we're not creating anything in the sense that we're not working with existing materials. Cloning, there's two different processes. The most common one is taking the egg, removing the DNA information in it, the nuclei, and then taking a cell. Usually the most successful is from an existing embryo, taking that cell and implanting it, the nuclei or the cell itself, into the egg. So the 46 chromosomes, if it was a human, it would be the 46 chromosomes that were in that embryo are now all transplanted into that egg. Whereas usually you have 23 from your mom, 23 from your dad. Together they make 46, two different entities. They're taking all 46 chromosomes, all the DNA from one existing person or thing. People have 46 chromosomes, other animals have different, and putting it into that egg and making it an exact DNA replica. So far, they have been able to create human embryos. This is something that should cause concern, is because I believe that birth or life begins at conception. As soon as the sperm fertilizes the egg, you have all the genetic information that makes you you at that point. The only time separating that one cell from you is time and food and the proper care. These embryos that they have created, no one believes that they're healthy enough or successful enough to actually produce a healthy human. But it does have the DNA that makes up a human. It has all 46 chromosomes. So be aware that this process is being searched. Primates, the two monkeys, were successfully cloned and brought to birth here recently. And they think that that's really the next step to understanding human cloning. So, since we brushed over it last week and didn't cover it a lot, I wanted to address it this week and know that it is something that's coming up. Yes. The stuff that I've looked at, they haven't successfully done that. And then there was some people in. Okay, well, most of the science articles, there was some people that actually proclaimed that they did this in '04 and '05, but there was no evidence to back what they said, and most people have written them off. China has successfully created embryos, and so has other people. But from the embryo to the human, it's still a long ways. Right, and the whole idea behind it was stem cells. Right, and I think abortion is a terrible thing to be at all. However, that drive for stem cells is what's driving this. And I will want to make note that out of all of the abortion stem cells that they've used, there is not one successful medication or pharmaceutical breakthrough that has come from aborted fetus stem cells. Not one. Now, there's over 70 to 80 that have came from adult stem cells. Adults have stem cells in them too, and they can be transformed into multiple things. There's been a huge amount of medical breakthrough from adult stem cells, but to this date, the aborted fetus stem cells, they have not made any successful gains in medicine. So don't be under the illusion that they're doing these abortions, that there's anything successful coming from them. That was the way it started for a reason to justify them, but it has by no means created any medical breakthrough through abortion fetus stem cells. Adult stem cells, they're doing great things. You got stem cells in your body. They can harvest. I'm looking at getting stem cells injected into my hip for some pain that I have because they've tried everything else. Stem cells are amazing things, but the medicine that they're using for stem cells now is not from these aborted fetus stem cells. That's an excuse to justify abortion, which is wrong. All right, since we touched on that a little bit, if anybody's got any questions, we can talk about it a little more. I think class is an important place to discuss these issues. If not, we will. I believe it is, yes. I know, that's the ethical issue is they're harvesting these stem cells from these embryos, which are technically, the way we define life, they're technically alive. A lot of people try to separate life and embryos and different stages, brain activity, development of the brain. That for me would be hard to do because once you have the genetic information to create all that material, I mean, it's like code once it goes into you and it starts sending out different information and building different parts. All that's there in that embryo. The ones that they're creating are not healthy. They're not viable in the sense that they think that they can become a full human. But in my mind, that doesn't justify messing with life in the way that they are just for medical purposes. So in a sense, they're trying to create humans that they can just use parts off of, which to me is very dangerous. Right. I'm using it in the creation form, not from nothing, but working with existing two different materials, putting them together and creating something. Yeah, I don't want to mistake that. They're not creating anything new. They're using existing material to make something. And cloning of mammals has been going on for decades now, since the 90s. Cloning of amphibians, reptiles, that's actually been going on even as early as late 70s. Daily Bible readers. But there's a whole different process when you're looking at primates and the human being. And even those that, I read about the idea that there's a lot of people cloning horses. There's still a huge amount of money involved in harvesting eggs, removing the genetic information out of them, putting genetic information in them, and it's not. And then they've got to stimulate that growth. I mean, they use a variety of different chemicals and electric shock to stimulate the growth to start these dividing cells. It's not something that they put it together and it just starts growing a baby or growing. It is not an easy process. I read about some of those cloning the horses for racing because they liked them in certain avenues. I'm actually a little highly skeptical on a lot of those. I think that is being propagated, that they're doing it a lot more than what they actually are, because the success rate is still extremely low. We're talking billions of dollars to actually have the medical facilities and the locations to actually the environment to create these things. I'm a little skeptical about it. Seems to be thriving in the horse industry that all this is taking place. All these people that are saying, well, we cloned 2 or 3 horses because they were good horses for, croquet. Or we clone these horses because they're good cutting horses. We clone these horses, but it seems to be specific to all these horses, which it leads me to doubt why just the horses. Right. Right, and I'm not saying that it doesn't. It's happening. I'm just questioning as to it's not the norm. In my mind, it's not the norm still. They are successfully doing this. When it comes to cloning humans, oh, I'm totally. Well, in reality, I think there's nothing new under the sun. So in history, if you go back and look, even in some of the archaeology, yeah, people have been playing God since Noah's day. If you go back and look at some of the archaeological history, there's things that went on in our history that we have no idea about. I don't think that this whole manipulating genetics is new. It's not. Right. Yeah, in the sense that creating parts is not the same as creating a human soul, I would agree. The question is, when does that human soul actually derive? Is it something that God actually hands out, or is it something that's in our code that once it reaches a certain point, God gives it to us? And those are the two questions that I would balance is when that human soul, when God, is it programmed to come at a certain time, or does God individually hand it out at that certain time? But, yes. Mhm. I don't think so. And I also separate the idea of humans from animals. I think that we can use genetic cloning on animals to, to improve their health, to improve their production of whatever it is we need. I think that's perfectly acceptable. The only thing that separates the humans aspect of it, in my mind, is the soul aspect. Where does that come into play? When it comes to cloning all these different animals for our benefit and how we can help sustain ourselves, I personally don't have a problem with it. We do it all the time. We genetically modify plants, genetically modify animals. So to me, that's a separate issue. I don't think that there's nothing wrong with that. The human aspect is where I think we run into danger. And to what degree is totally up in the air. Everybody has, this is something that you need to look into yourself. Like I said, it is absolutely verifiable by the scientific data that they present or that I've read that they are creating human embryos. There may be somebody actually created a human person. There's no actual record of it. I don't know. To where they've been able to grow it. Even these embryos that they've created, nobody believes that they'll actually make it to an adult because there's defects in it. It's nothing like human conception in the sense that you put it together and it grows. They have to literally shock and manipulate this to get the cells to start dividing. And when the cells start dividing, then all kinds of things start taking place. All right, this would be good for y'all to go look up on your own, get an idea of it, because it is coming and it's right here at the forefront. But it is interesting. Anything else? If not, we'll get kicked off in our lesson. All right, so chapter 6 says, but when you follow God, but only on your own terms. Is it possible to follow God only on your own terms? I heard a nope. Doesn't sound like a very successful task. We go back to Pharaoh. You got to use his terms. We'll go back to Pharaoh. Moses came to Pharaoh, let my people go, sent him some plagues. Pharaoh finally says, okay, I'll let them go. But don't go very far. I'll let you go, but just go out to here, and then y'all can do what you want. Do it on my terms. Pharaoh wanted to do things on his terms. How did that work out for him? No, God brought this full force and showed him who he was. When I think about doing things on my own terms, many times I think we do this on a very smaller scale. When we're called to serve, when we're called to anything, we say, well, I'll serve God, but as long as it's something I enjoy doing, as long as it's something I'm comfortable with, as long as it's something I'm good at, I'll serve you, but I need to do something that I can enjoy too. For me, it's much like the format of all these lessons. I'm not a topical kind of guy that discusses different topics in a classroom setting because it just seems that you bounce all over the place. For me, I like to read a chapter, break it down, go through the chapter and look at it. This is not something I'm comfortable at in these broad topic classes. But if I only told God, well, I'll do this, I'll teach if I can read a chapter at a time and we can go through it. That's trying to do things on my own terms. I think we do this all the time in small scales, even when it comes to helping people. I use myself as an example because that's the best example I got. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say one of the things, last 3 chapters of Judges that got people in so much trouble. It says there, never man did what was right in his own eyes.
Yes.
In the eyes of God, did what was right in his own eyes. That's talking about the Israelite people.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not work well.
No, it didn't. And you jumped to my next topic there, but we'll get to that too. But the idea of us doing things on our own terms. For me, it's different teaching avenues, things that I'm asked to do. I'm not a social butterfly. I could be totally content down there on my little piece of land. And if I didn't see people for months other than my family, I'd probably be content. That doesn't mean that that negates what God has set up and established, that it's good for us to socialize, fellowship, to get together one with another. For me, I'd much rather go out if we had somebody, a tornado came through and we needed to clear some work or clear some land. I'd grab my chainsaw and I'd be happy spending the day clearing wood. But if somebody wants me to just come up to a gathering of some sort, I'm not nearly as motivated. That's just me. Every one of us has these things that we prefer, that we like, or that we would do. But if we didn't get out of our comfort zone, we wouldn't grow, and a lot of times we wouldn't be adhering to God's ultimate plan. We'd be doing things on our own terms. Now to Judges. To Judges, when I think about this topic, I can't help but think about Judges. The common theme, as Dan said, was they did everything, everyone did as they saw fit in their own eyes. Did these people know God? Well, they knew of him. They knew who he was. They didn't have a relationship with him, but they knew, because every time they got in trouble, who did they cry out to? They cried out to God. God raised up a judge, and then they came and saved them. So this was a reoccurring theme in Judges. God designed us, and he knows what's best for us. Sometimes what's best for us is making us get out of our comfort zone, making us do things that we wouldn't regularly do. All these things, while they may not feel comfortable, can help you grow. So the book goes into detail about, it jumps into the parent-child relationship. And there's not a whole lot of us out here that are parent and child. There's a lot of grandparents out here. So I want to break this down a little more into the idea of obedience. What is obedience? What would be a good working definition of obedience? I heard two at once. I heard what? To do what's been asked of you. What else? Same thing. So obedience is to do what's been asked of you. Okay, that's a good working definition. The one, when I looked it up, it basically says obedience is defined as a dutiful or submissive compliance to the commands of the one in authority. With Christians, the one in authority should be obvious. Who's in authority? God is our ultimate authority. What does it mean to be dutiful to God? I think your definition to God is obeying his commands, an obligation to obey his commands. What about this idea of being submissive? Submissive is basically giving up your will. It's yielding your will to the person that's in authority. So being into your choice, you have the choice to be submissive. People can beat you into submission, yeah, but it's not the same being submissive to God that we are called to do. So dutiful or submissive compliance to the commands of one authority when it comes to the commands of God. Through his word. And there's also portions of it written on our hearts. We know what is right. Oh. If being obedient is being submissive and compliant to God's commands, why is obedience important? In the sense that God knows what's best for us. Being obedient, if he knows what's best for us, should benefit us. So what are some examples of why obedience is important? What does it help us in aspects to God? Yes?
The greatest example we have that is Christ himself. Philippians tells us he was equal with God, but willingly became a bond of the Father. Even though he was equal with him, he submitted him, became totally subservient to the Father, and sets that example for us today of what it means to be a complete servant. And as just coming to rest in it,
Yes, and he's the perfect example of that in the way he emptied himself. And you keep jumping to my next notes. You're doing a good job. At least it means I'm going the right way if you're jumping there already. Yes, Jesus. Well, this is the deal. If you are following along in the book, you'll find that I don't necessarily follow it verbatim because I can't do it. I don't know how to do that. I can't read out of somebody else's book. So they focus much on the parent child. I want to make sure that we've got it from top down, from God, Jesus, us, then the children. So if you are in the book, the broader picture of obedience is what I'm going after. But Dan is right in the sense that Jesus, equal with God, emptied himself, became human, was an amazing example for us. And since we're on that topic of examples, in the way that Jesus also wanted to do it a different way. He said, if there's another way to do this, let's do it. To me, that's real. I mean, that's human. But he said, if there's not, then I'll do it your way. It's fine for us to talk with God. Ask him, if there's another way we can do this, let me know. But ultimately, I'm going to follow what you say. And that's a very hard thing to do as a human. And Jesus showed us that perfect example. I found that in Scripture, Jesus doesn't ask us to do anything that he himself is not willing to do, which I find comforting. Because I don't know if, for me, when our Congress makes rules different for them than that we have to live by, I find that troubling. Or for me, when a leader stands up and says, y'all go do this, but he does this. If you read the Quran, Muhammad gave different rules that he didn't necessarily have to follow. I find that troubling. If Jesus was a leader in the sense that he told us what to do and he did something totally different, I would find that hard to follow. And as people and as parents, we need to be leading by example. In my mind and in my experience, people are going to far more listen or pay attention to what you do rather than what you say. With my boys, about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer, time goes really fast, we set out to do Lads to Leaders, memorizing 100 scriptures. And we set out with the book of James. I told them that I would do it with them. I said, if you are going to do it, I'll do it. And I did. And of course, I think Elijah, he may have been. So it was a good pace. I could learn faster than they could, but they kept up. And we learned it, the whole book of James, and they could say it all the way through. And I was quite impressed.